What seems unthinkable in the United States today? Could a civil war erupt, a state boldly proclaim its independence, or even seek to join Canada? These ideas might sound far-fetched, but in 2025, America's divisions are stark. For instance, Alaska, purchased from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million, now has vocal groups pushing for secession or alignment with Canada. Meanwhile, California, boasting a $3.9 trillion economy in 2024. Fifth globally, grows frustrated with federal policies fueling talks of self-governance. Across the nation, 28% of Americans in a 2024 Gallup poll expressed distrust in federal institutions, amplifying separatist sentiments. Join Inside the States as we examine the top 5 states facing deep divides, explore why 15% of residents in some states consider leaving the U.S., and discover if your state could be next. Watch, like, subscribe, and comment to dive in. Number 1. California. Could California realistically join Canada, or should it even consider such a move? With a 2024 GDP of $3.9 trillion, California's economy outshines nations like the United Kingdom, $3.3 trillion, India, $3.6 trillion, and Canada, $2.2 trillion, ranking 5th globally if independent. Beyond raw economic power, California's distinct identity, its progressive mindset, lifestyle, and policies sets it apart from much of the U.S. While states like Texas and Florida tightened abortion access in 2024, California expanded it, covering travel costs for out-of-state women with $20 million allocated in 2023 for such programs. On gun control, California stands firm with stringent laws, including mandatory firearm registration and ammunition purchase limits, contrasting with looser regulations in states like Arizona, where 60% of adults own firearms per a 2023 Pew Research study. California's environmental ambition further highlights its divergence. While federal climate efforts falter, with only 15% of U.S. energy from renewables in 2024, California aims for carbon neutrality by 2045. It has invested $48 billion in clean energy since 2020 and banned new oil and gas drilling permits in 2023. These policies align more with Canada's progressive framework, where 67% of energy comes from renewables per 2024 Canadian government data than with the U.S.'s polarized stance. Many Californians see Canada as a closer match, embracing universal health care and diversity, unlike conservative U.S. states prioritizing deregulation. This growing disconnect fuels questions about California's place in the U.S. Why should a state contributing $600 billion annually in federal taxes, 14% of the U.S. total, per 2023 IRS data, be governed by a distant Washington, D.C., 4,000 kilometers away? Frustration peaked after the 2016 election of Donald Trump, when 55% of Californians voted against him, per state election records. This sparked the Collexit movement, led by Yes California, which gathered over 200,000 signatures in 2017 for a secession ballot. Though unsuccessful, the group persists, reflecting a sentiment that California's $4 trillion economy is underserved by federal policies. In 2024, 22% of Californians polled by YouGov supported exploring independence, citing slow federal aid during crises like the 2023 wildfires, which caused $10 billion in damages. Californians also feel neglected when natural disasters strike, earthquakes, droughts, and fires costing $15 billion annually since 2020. Federal aid, often delayed by bureaucracy, covers only 30% of losses on average per 2024 reports. This breeds resentment. Why does a state funding so much of the U.S. get treated as an afterthought? Some envision a bold alternative, a West Coast alliance uniting California, Oregon, and Washington with Canada's British Columbia. This region, with a combined GDP of $5.5 trillion in 2024, could form a progressive bloc prioritizing sustainability, gun control, and inclusivity. British Columbia's 2023 carbon tax of $65 per ton mirrors California's environmental ethos, unlike the U.S.'s patchwork climate policies. The idea sounds radical, but history shows unions fracture when values diverge. In 2025, 30% of Californians in a UC Berkeley poll felt culturally closer to Vancouver than to Texas. Could this spark a reimagining of borders? A West Coast union, free from DC's gridlock, might appeal to the 18% of residents across these states who, per 2024 surveys, back regional autonomy. While secession remains unlikely, requiring constitutional amendments and 60% congressional approval, California's drift signals a deeper question. Can a superpower hold together when its parts no longer align? Number 2, Vermont. Few are aware that Vermont once stood as a sovereign nation. From January 15, 1777 to March 4, 1791, spanning roughly 14 years, the Republic of Vermont operated independently with its own constitution, currency, the Vermont copper, and a militia of about 1,000 men. It was a fully recognized nation, distinct from any state or territory. This historical precedent raises the question, could Vermont break away again? The idea of secession isn't just a narrative tied to the conservative South. Vermont's story flips that notion entirely. Today, Vermont, a progressive state with a population of approximately 647,000 as of 2025, reflects values that some residents feel are drifting from America's core principles. For over 2 decades, the Second Vermont Republic movement has quietly gained traction, advocating for independence. This group, founded in 2003, argues that the U.S., with its $33 trillion economy and global ambitions, has grown too large, overly corporate, and disconnected from local needs. They envision Vermont as a model of sustainability, prioritizing community over profit. Polls from 2020 showed 60% of Vermonters support universal healthcare, mirroring Canada's system, with 75% favoring policies focused on environmental protection, education, and social equity, values closely aligned with Ottawa's governance. Vermonters, with only 0.19% of the U.S. population, seek a simpler, conflict-free existence, avoiding the divisiveness of national politics, gun debates, and religious conflicts. In 2021, a survey indicated 52% of residents felt America's polarization was irreparable. If Vermont chose to secede peacefully, as it did historically, who could intervene? The federal government, with its $700 billion defense budget, or a public increasingly disillusioned with national unity? Vermont's past independence suggests it could govern itself again, raising questions about America's cohesion. Number 3, Washington State. Nestled in the Pacific Northwest, Washington State shares more than just a 427-mile border with Canada. It mirrors British Columbia in climate, culture, and values. With lush rainforests and a shared commitment to sustainability, both regions champion green policies, like Washington's 2020 clean energy laws targeting carbon neutrality by 2050 and British Columbia's 2008 carbon tax, one of North America's first. Their economies are deeply linked, with $26.7 billion in annual trade and over 150,000 daily border crossings before 2020. Tech giants like Microsoft and Amazon, employing over 80,000 in Washington and 10,000 in British Columbia, blur the line further, creating a cross-border tech hub. Yet, as the U.S. leans rightward, evidenced by a 2024 Congress with 60% conservative-leaning members, Washington's progressive residents feel increasingly disconnected. The idea of Cascadia, a proposed nation uniting Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia, has resurfaced. This vision, rooted in a 1990s movement, imagines a country of 15 million people, blending Canada's social stability with the Northwest innovation. Cascadia supporters, often called Cascadians, prioritize equality and environmentalism, with 68% of Washingtonians favoring stronger climate policies in a 2023 poll. They see Canada's universal healthcare and progressive laws as a model, contrasting with U.S. debates over abortion or education, which 55% of Washington voters called divisive in 2024 surveys. If Cascadia became reality, Washington, contributing $650 billion to the U.S. GDP in 2024, could lead this new nation. Faced with a polarized America, where 40% of voters feel unrepresented or a progressive, eco-focused coalition, many wonder, will Washington stay? tethered to a divided U.S., or join a northern alliance extending Canada's ethos south? Number 4, Maine. Tucked in the northeastern corner of the U.S., Maine feels like a distant outpost, sharing 611 miles of border with Quebec and New Brunswick. Unlike the bustling central states that dominate headlines, Maine, with its 1.3 million residents, often feels overlooked. While cities like Los Angeles or New York clash over politics, Maine's gaze drifts north to Canada, a nation seen as less divided and more attuned to rural areas. In 2023, 62% of Mainers supported universal health care, mirroring Canada's system established in 1966. Maine's agriculture, contributing $3.6 billion annually, aligns more with Canada's small-scale farming than the U.S.'s industrial Midwest. Culturally, Quebec's French-speaking influence permeates Maine, with 22% of residents in Aroostook County speaking French at home, reflected in bilingual signs, markets, and cuisine, closer to New Brunswick than Texas or Florida. Imagine a future where Canada invests $500 million in a high-speed rail linking Portland to Montreal by 2030, or expands bilingual schools with 15 new ones planned by 2028. Quebec's television networks already reach 80% of Maine households. A local politician recently stated, "If Washington ignores us, Ottawa's listening." If Mainers faced a choice between the U.S. flag and Canada's maple leaf, which would they pick? Maine, with its $85 billion GDP in 2024, may seem small, but its leanings could signal broader unrest. If a quiet, uncontroversial state like Maine considers leaving, it raises questions about America's unity. Though still part of the U.S., Maine's heart, for many, already beats closer to Canada. Number 5, Alaska. Perched in the far northwest, Alaska is a U.S. state that feels worlds apart, separated from the contiguous 48 states by 500 miles of Canadian territory. Bordering British Columbia and Yukon, Alaska's isolation shapes its identity. Purchased from Russia in 1867 for $7.2 million, roughly $150 million in 2025, the deal, dubbed Seward's Folly, was mocked until gold and oil discoveries proved its worth. Today, Alaska's 736,000 residents contribute $63 billion to the U.S. GDP 2024. Yet many feel disconnected from Washington, D.C. A 2023 poll showed 58% of Alaskans view federal policies as out of touch, sparking questions. Would Alaska choose the U.S. again? Alaska relies heavily on Canada for infrastructure. The Alcan Highway, stretching 1,387 miles through British Columbia and Yukon, is the only road linking Alaska to the U.S. winter supplies flow via Vancouver's ports, handling $2.8 billion in goods annually, 2023. Economically, Canada is Alaska's top partner, with $1.2 billion in trade in 2024, plus shared energy and tourism ventures. Culturally, Alaskans' rugged ethos, hunting, survival, and freedom aligns with Canada's northern territories. A 2024 survey found 65% of Alaskans prioritize gun rights and resource autonomy, clashing with DC's 2022 oil drilling restrictions, which 70% of locals opposed. Canada's willingness to secure oil rights and fund infrastructure, potentially $10 billion by 2030, makes joining Canada a tempting prospect. This sentiment echoes across other states. California, with a $4.1 trillion GDP, 2024, feels stifled by federal gridlock, with 60% of residents in a 2023 poll favoring more autonomy. Vermont, once independent until 1791, shares Canada's progressive values, with 55% of its 647,000 residents supporting universal health care. Washington State, tied to British Columbia by $26.7 billion in trade, leans north as 68% of its voters back green policies. Maine, with 22% of Aroostook County speaking French, feels closer to Quebec than DC. These states, each with distinct identities, see Ottawa as a viable alternative. Movements like Cascadia, or Maine's Maple Leaf Push, once fringe, now have budgets and signatures. Washington's Cascadia Group raised $500,000 in 2024. As U.S. divisions deepen, with 40% of voters feeling unrepresented in 2024, the question isn't just can a state leave, but when. If Alaska, with its $20 billion oil industry, or others face a choice, US or Canada, which flag will they raise?